One of my favorite places that I've ever visited in my life is Peru. It is a diverse culture. It has incredible food, and it was one of the most adventurous trips of my life. A bunch of my friends and I went there for about 2 weeks last year, and I couldn't recommend it more. It starts off in the rainforest, where we were in huts on the river. And then by the end of the trip, we were way up top in the mountains of Machu Picchu and Cusco. We had a blast. We were fishing for piranhas, and then we went and did the sand dune thing, like in Star Wars, where you're riding on like the board into an oasis and you're whipping around on dune buggies. And if you get the chance to go, I highly recommend it. But one thing about Peru that you can't escape is just how ancient this place is. In the US, we've got this thing where we tear things down after 50 years, and it's kind of a tired thing now, right? Like the oldest history we have is, a couple hundred years, and it's still very old, and there's so much there. But now imagine a civilization that has been around in various forms for thousands of years. And that means that they have been influenced by all different cultures, and they've gone through all different iterations as a civilization would, and frankly, as we kind of are now. And when you're walking through streets like that, and you're meeting the people, and you're touching their fabrics, and you're learning about them, you really get a sense of just how rich that history has to be to just grow up in it. And my travel agent, who's also a good girlfriend of mine, was on the trip, and she actually grew up in Peru. She set the whole thing up because those were her old stomping grounds. And we got to talking when we were walking through some Incan ruins about that history and what caused such an incredible dynasty to collapse. And the answer is actually one of the most unlucky stories I've ever heard of a royal. So with that said, welcome back to another episode of Crowned, Gilded, and Screwed. My name is Kara Mae Adamo, and today we are going to be discussing Atahualpa, the last Incan emperor. So to start off, before we get into Atahualpa and what caused his ultimate demise and why I consider him one of the least lucky royals and therefore perfect for this show, we're going to get into kind of the beginning of the Incas and what their civilization was like. There is a lot in this particular story that is very word of mouth. Part of that is the Incas themselves did not actually have written language at the time of our tale. They were more about qualitative data or quantitative data over qualitative data. So they did have a set of data entry techniques called Quipu, which is a series of knots. And those knots in various degrees could mean any number of things. Usually it was to keep track of numbers of items. So like, basically, how many cattle that they had or what the dates were, it was an intricate system. I don't even personally understand all of it, but we will actually link out a video that explains it if you are interested. But these knots in various degrees would correspond with other knots, and it was a very intricate language, but it was more or less to just document numerical things. So qualitative stories were more of an oral thing. People would tell them, and then they would pass them down word of mouth, which is kind of how a lot of history was for a very long time throughout the world. But at the time of our story, that is still the case with the Incas. So they don't have written stories for this. What we do have is their side of things, often through nowadays documentary filmmakers and historians and archaeologists, but also through the European side of the story, which is mostly from the Spanish point of view. So everything that we are going to be discussing today is kind of a hybrid of those two stories. And I want to point out how they veer off, because there are points in the story where the perspectives differ dramatically. And I think it's an interesting study in revisionist history versus what the established curriculum might be. You know, there is the old saying that history is told by the victors, and it's very true. So we're going to kind of highlight that. All of that said, we're actually beginning farther back, way before the Spanish showed up and started telling things the way that they perceived them, into about 1230 AD. And at this time is where, like, basically the formation of what was considered the Incas begins. It's one rooted in legend. There is a bit of mysticism involved. Basically, there are two main stories, but they're kind of similar. So they both center around the idea that there were three caves. And those three caves were significant because out of one of them emerged Manco Capac. And Manco Capac in Incan lore is considered the son of Inti, which was the sun god, and of the moon goddess. So he's literally a celestial being on Earth. He is a deity himself, and he comes with this golden staff. And he sets out and he says, I am going to guide you to what will be your new capital. And that is the beginning of the story. So he sets out and he goes up to what is now Cusco, which is actually above Machu Picchu. To get to Machu Picchu from Cusco, you actually traveled down, which I thought was kind of surprising when I was there. So Cusco's way high up in the mountains in what is currently present-day Peru. And he sets his golden staff down and he announces, this will be your home now. And very Moses in a way. There always seems to be a dude with a staff, and that's how like a civilization starts. I don't know. But he sets his golden staff down and everyone decides, okay, he's our leader, he's our king, he's our god, literally. And that was where they built a sun temple. And from then on, his lineage was considered like a godly lineage, and they ruled the Inca Empire. That is where the story begins. And then 300 years later, they are still considered actual descendants from the sun god and the moon goddess, and they have presided over the Inca territory. At the start of our story, we have Huayna Capac. Huayna Capac is an Incan ruler. He is incredibly successful. This is what is considered to be like the height of like the empire's just success, basically. And it spans a huge ass part of South America. It covers Bolivia, it covers Ecuador, it covers Peru, it covers parts of Colombia. Chile is part of it. You could almost consider them like the Romans of South America. And like the Romans of South America, as they would conquer lands, they would just bring you into the fold and just you would fall in line and then you would push on forward. And while this was successful, what it also amounted to was a lot of people didn't really have a ton of loyalty towards them. They just kind of went, all right, I guess you're the ruler now. But I wouldn't say that it was like a lot of like personal loyalty. It was just sort of like you had to. And that actually does very much play in later. But for Huayna Capac, he's very successful. He has a number of wives, a number of concubines, and he has children with all of them. It is not a monogamous culture. It was very common to have a bunch of wives and mistresses. And the thing about the Incas that is dramatically different from European civilizations is that for the Incas, there wasn't really an illegitimate son. And your lineage is not passed down to your eldest son either. It is whoever you decide should be king once you pass. Also important about this, currency wasn't similar to European currency. So they had currency and they had taxes, but the taxes were a labor tax. So like, for instance, instead of paying a tithe to the king, what they would instead do is they would have a labor tax recorded by those knots of you donate a certain amount of your time to building these roads or to basically creating the infrastructure of this massive kingdom, which is pretty brilliant. That was expected of absolutely every family, I'm sure, other than nobles, of which there were many. It is important to know that the Incas were actually a ruling class in this land. it was like the ruling class and the nobility and the king. Those were the Incas. So there would be about 40,000 of those. And then they presided over 10 million other people. So we collectively refer to them as the Incas, but at the time it was actually a difference in classes. So the Incas themselves kept track of everybody else, and they did have a wealthy, wealthy country by European standards especially. They had rooms full of gold. The actual Incan emperor himself would walk in silver sandals. They valued precious metals and jewels, but they didn't value them as currency. They valued them as more of an aesthetic thing. Like, they were really into accessories, but that was pretty much what they used it for, and also for offerings because gold looked like the sun, etc. But it was not revered or treasured quite as much as it would have been throughout the rest of the world because they just had a different currency system. So they have a ton of gold. It is a very mineral-rich area, and they mined it for what they wanted. But they didn't really use it, again, to exchange for like the exchange of goods. But here's the thing. While these emperors were very wealthy, they also didn't believe in like inherited wealth. So a new emperor did not just take his father's wealth. His father often was buried with his wealth, or it was just pushed to the side, and then he would then be responsible for making his own money. So that's part of the reason for why they expanded throughout all of Central America, is that like the only way to really acquire anything, land and labor, which were their major commodities other than food and crops. They were also a farming community. But in order to acquire more of that and to therefore bolster that monarchy, you would have to basically start from scratch. So you would have to push into other territories because your dad's shit is not yours, which I actually kind of jive with because it makes it so that your kid has to like pave their own way, literally. So Huayna Capac does this. He's not given his father's wealth. He is given his father's title and power, but he proceeds to push forward. And what he does is he goes north. So Cusco is still, at the time of this part of the story, still the central capital of what is considered the Inca Empire. He pushes further upward, but he keeps his favorite wife and his son with that wife in Cusco as like a presence, like a royal presence there. His son's name is Huascar, and Huascar is not very much like his father. He's kind of a timid guy. He's also got a bit of a drinking problem, and he likes to fuck. Like, this dude sleeps with everybody. He's a womanizer. He's also got a really bad temper, but that he did get from his dad, but like in like a drunk way. So while Huascar is in Cusco, learning from the priests, also drinking, also womanizing, and apparently pitching bitch fits with his mother. I guess he butt heads with her, and he wasn't so, by some accounts, not so respectful to his mom. While he was doing that, Huayna Capac is charging north to further expand what was considered Tawantinsuyu. That is the name of the Incan Empire, and it actually literally translates to the four quarters. So he's pushing north to acquire more, to build his empire up and his own personal wealth. And because he is a military guy, he needs the sons that can hang, that can roll with him. And one of his favorite sons with one of his favorite secondary wives, a Ecuadorian princess, is Atahualpa. And Atahualpa is completely different than Huascar. They actually have a lot of siblings, but these are like the main ones. He has a ton of his father's qualities. He is a military guy. He also has a bad temper. He's notoriously ruthless when he needs to be. But he's very big, he's very tall, he's a good-looking guy. He has a wife, he has, all of that as well, but he is very military focused, and he becomes his dad's right hand. So Huayna and Atahualpa are broing it out, conquering lands in the north, while Huascar is with the priests, drinking, womanizing, doing whatever it is he's doing. Now we're, at this point in the story, you're around like the 1519 to 1521 range. At the same time that all of this is going on and Huayna is going forward, a couple of things are going down in the rest of the world that will affect them. Number one is over in what is now present-day Mexico. Cortez is conquering the Aztecs. and he does it for gold, and he does something that completely changes the course of history. He becomes incredibly wealthy. Like, he becomes rich. He then inspires a whole bunch of guys in Spain. One of these guys is named Francisco Pizarro. Now, Pizarro's an interesting cat because he's not wealthy at all. He's actually almost penniless. He's completely illiterate, and he's kind of a dick. But what he does have is ambition. And he manages to slither his way up through the ranks and get on a ship and get people into what is now Panama. And he establishes Panama City and becomes the mayor, like the first ever established Spanish mayor of that area. But it's not good enough for him. He has heard tales of Cortez. He has heard how much wealth there is, and he wants in. So what he does is he goes down to Isla de Gallo, and he stays there and plots his next move because he wants to be wealthy. He is done being penniless. He hates that he was lowborn. At this point, he has already tried to get into South America before once, fucks it up, goes back to Spain, gets 3 of his half-brothers and a bunch of other guys, and then goes back down to the island. So it's like a whole process for him. But at this point, he is now back, and he's planning. But things are getting kind of shitty on this island because the guys are failing so much. They are hungry, they're bored, they were promised wealth and success, they're angry. So he's dealing with unrest on this little island that is off the coast of South America. In the meantime, though, smallpox has been brought to South America, along with a number of other diseases, but for this case, it's actually smallpox that's going to be the center. So while Hayana Capac is an incredible warrior, he's young. I mean, the guy's like in his 40s to 50s at this point. He's not old, doesn't even have gray hair. He is not invincible, and despite being considered a god, is not immortal either, at least by, traditional standards. And he contracts smallpox while he's up conquering the north. And that is where our story gets crazy. So he contracts this disease, and the natives did not have anything to really compare this to. They had no immunity toward it. Obviously, vaccines weren't even a thing at the time. So it sweeps through and it decimates their culture. People are dying by the thousands, including Hayana Capac. He contracts the disease and he's on his deathbed very suddenly. And this guy did not expect to die this young. He had no heir in mind yet. He hadn't really figured out what he was going to do because, again, you don't leave your empire just to your oldest son. You leave it to who you think is the best suited for the job, which is honestly probably the best idea. Other royals probably should have taken note, but here we are. So he doesn't really know where he wants to go with this. So he has Ninan, who is one of his other sons, in mind. And he's probably the most level-headed option. Let's leave this country to him. The problem is he also has smallpox and in no short order dies from it. Here's where the story gets a little fuzzy because I'm not sure which order of events quite happened the way that it actually did because there's a little fuzziness. By some accounts, Hayana had left his kingdom to Huascar down in Cusco. By other accounts, he said Huascar's name but was fading in and out of a coma, and in amongst that also said Atahualpa's name. That's one version. Another version is that Ninan died after he died, and that he never left it to either one of them, and instead, the priests down in Cusco bolstered Huascar because they know him and probably can control him, and the military guys in the north are backing Atahualpa as the option. There's no way to really tell which one is accurate, but either way, after Hayana dies, his sons are at an impasse. You have Atahualpa, who's completely different than Huascar, and he's been conquering the north with his father. He's the most like his father. He probably knows a lot more about being a military man, but he doesn't know anything about Cusco. He's not spending any time there. He wasn't really born there. Huascar is in the capital. He's born there and knows all of the ins and outs of those politics, but knows nothing of military. So what they end up doing is they kind of split it in half to where the Inca Empire is split between the north and the south and being commanded by both men as if they're emperors. It's giving Romulus and Remus, like, which one is going to be the ultimate emperor at a time when Francisco Pizarro is plotting his little takeover. But they don't know that. There's no way for them to know that. There are some accounts that will say that Atahualpa, as early on as his father, knew about these guys, and it would make sense because they already have smallpox, so they must have come in contact with the Spaniards at some point, but we don't necessarily know that he knew Pizarro himself. Either way, they're not really thinking about Pizarro and his paltry, like, 180 men that he has off on an island somewhere. They have literally millions of people to worry about, and combating views on how the empire should be governed. What ends up happening is they form kind of like we'll call it a shaky peace. It's not. It's full of passive aggression and a whole bunch of dick measuring, but we'll call it peace because there was not really any fighting, technically. So when Hayana dies, Atahualpa really pisses his brother off by doing this massive funeral procession for their father. Understand that the Incas were kind of weird about mummification. And what they might do sometimes was mummify former leaders and bring them into battle with them as if they were like their ancestors helping with the battle. It's like it was very Weekend at Bernie's, and they would do that. So he creates this funeral procession where he has his mummified father crown him king. It's kind of a dick move because that technically isn't what happened. It's his way of making it seem like his father announced him as the true ruler. And it understandably pisses Huascar off. Because first of all, it's their dad. And second of all, like, that's not how it went down at all. By like any telling of the story, that's not how it went down. It was either Huascar and Atahualpa, or neither, or just Huascar. It was never just Atahualpa. But either way, Atahualpa, as a hot-headed 20-something-year-old dude, does this. Huascar is like 5 to 10 years older than him, but he's honestly not much better. And so they kind of have like a bitch fest, like bickering match, but they're more or less in their own lane. So you've got Huascar, who's drinking and carousing and womanizing and being with the priests and kind of commanding lower Cusco. Lower geographically, Cusco, again, is way high up in the air. It's one of the highest places I've actually ever been. The only other one is Rainbow Mountain, also in Peru. Highly recommended. That's where I got this. So that's where he's at. Atahualpa, after this funeral procession nonsense that he pulls, is still up in Quito, which is actually where his mother is from because she's like an empress up there. Or not an empress, but she's like a princess. So he's up there and he's commanding his army. These two are not actually getting along that well. It's a lot of passive aggression and a lot of dick measuring and a lot of fights and all that stuff. So much so that by some accounts, the way things get bloody is Huascar plots and captures his little brother and puts him in a little imprisoned hut on the side of a road. Hut, I mean, it was manned and guarded and all of that, but it's just like a little building on the side of the road. The side of the road that stretches all the way up and down what is basically the Incan Empire. So they had a road system that was pretty impressive for the time. They also had irrigation and everything else. Again, it was kind of like Rome in a lot of ways. A really put together kind of modern civilization considering how long ago this took place. So he's on the side of this road, but this road has a lot of footmen and it has a lot of soldiers, and he escapes. He escapes prison, and now he's pissed. So he plots against his brother, and a civil war blossoms from all of the wrath. So now they're fighting, and they are decimating their people. They are just, while these people have already been struggling because of smallpox, now they've got a civil war on their hands. So food is scarce, money isn't really traditional money, but like resources are scarce. Labor tax is scarce because they're fighting now. So the growth of this empire is at a standstill while these two duke it out. Eventually, Atahualpa, who is a billion times the military man Huascar could ever even pretend to be, does ultimately take over. And he captures his brother. In fairness, Huascar started it. He captured him first. Only Huascar can't escape. So Atahualpa imprisons him, and to make a point, he fucking slaughters Huascar's entire family just to like make sure none of them can like get him out or help him or anything like that. Slaughters his men, slaughters the family, which is also, just to review, Atahualpa's family technically, but you know, I guess they were on a different side, and really much of history is siblings killing each other, so that makes sense. So now Huascar is imprisoned, and Atahualpa is living his best life. He's now the crowned emperor of all of the Incan territories. And so he has himself a little celebration. He decides to have himself a spa day. No, really, he had a spa day. He went to the baths and he had a spa day. In Cajamarca, where you can still visit, there are a number of what are considered sacred baths. And these baths were traditional for warriors to go and sort of relax, decompress, have some me time, have a little bit of a meditation. They would fast at these spas, and then they could reemerge and newer and better them. It was very new year, new me. And so they would do that, and it was a spiritual experience, and it's still considered a spiritual experience. You can go to these baths even today. It is not encouraged that you Instagram them, though. They are considered sacred. And I do encourage every one of you to go to them, and I very much encourage every one of you to not take out your cameras. Have respect, whether it's your religion or not. It's important for the culture. That being said, not everybody had that kind of respect for the culture. So, while the boys are fighting before the spa day, what's happening with Pizarro? Well, he's in hot water with everybody. They're all pissed at him because, again, they have not conquered anything yet, but they were promised all of these riches like Cortez. They were promised that they would have gold and silver beyond their wildest dreams. The streets were paved in gold, all of that nonsense, which actually wasn't too far off the mark. Technically, there were gardens paved in gold because the Incas thought it was pretty. They didn't really care. But Pizarro's, he's like in hot water, and people are angry and they're ready to go home. They want to go back to Panama. So he's on the beach at this island, and he takes his sword and he literally draws a line in the sand. There are a lot of origin stories about the draw the line in the sand shtick. I don't even necessarily think that this was the original one. I think this is just something a lot of guys did. But this actually predates what, if you Google, is the line in the sand origin. I think it probably goes back way far. But according to the history that we are taught, Pizarro literally does this, and he says, look, you guys can either go onto that boat and you can go back to Panama, but you're not going to have money, you're not going to have power, you're not going to have greatness. Or you can come across that line, you could stand with me, and we're going to go get ourselves some riches. Out of the 180 people, 13 dude bros join him. Everybody else nopes out. They're just like, nope, we're done. You go do you. We're out. We can't deal with this anymore. We will figure it out. We'll find something else to do. We miss our families. Like you're insane. So they leave. They go on these ships. They go back to Panama, or honestly wherever else they felt like going, as long as it wasn't with Pizarro, who by all accounts was kind of a jerk. And him and his 13 merry men make their way over into what is now current day Peru. So now we have what is basically a perfect storm of catastrophe. You have Huascar, who's been captured. Again, he started it. You have Atahualpa, who's now the emperor, and he is the Sapa Inca. Now, Sapa Inca translates roughly to the unique Inca or the only Inca, which means he is the absolute primo king. He is considered a god among his people. He's considered the sun god incarnate. He is blessed by the sun. He had his dead dad's corpse say so, and he's having a spa day. So he is up in the mountain areas, and he's meditating and he's fasting, while Pizarro makes his way over the ridge and peers into Cajamarca. Now, what Pizarro sees, you have to understand, is a city plaza with some buildings surrounding it, which is still there. I've walked it. And then if you look up into the mountains, he sees tents. And those tents he perceives to be military tents. like soldiers ready to charge because, you know, he's such a fucking threat, him and his 13 friends. But what they actually are is they're nobles hanging out with Atahualpa because they're giving thanks and they're celebrating the fact that they have won this war, which has nothing to do with Pizarro. Nobody's even thinking about Pizarro. He's somewhere else. Like nobody, they're, if they remember him at all, it's shocking. I read by some accounts that when Atahualpa actually did run into Spaniards, he didn't even talk to them. He did not deign to look at their existence. He was about 8 feet taller than them practically, and they were fair-skinned, and he was weirded out by them, and that was it. The Europeans like to say that because they were fair-skinned, the Incas thought that they were gods, because the Europeans like to say that about everybody who met them for the first time. Like apparently the entire rest of the world was like, oh, white, you must be gods. Because every dude bro in the history of dude bros has always had a god complex, and it's made evident by the fact that that's always the history that is recorded over and over again. The accuracy of that is questionable at best. There was a prophecy about the idea that there would be a god, like multiple people of multiple colors coming, but they even thought that some of them would be blue. Like it wasn't just white guys. These guys just happen to be white. So the perception is questionable, but that's like what the Europeans say. Either way, they come down into this little square and they realize pretty quickly, no matter who those people are up in the tents, they're woefully outnumbered. And outnumbered is not good. So they start to plot. Now again, remember, a lot of the people that Atahualpa technically rules don't necessarily like him. For one thing, a lot of them worked for his brother up until like yesterday, and even before that, they were conquered in their own lands by either Atahualpa or his dad or some other guy before them, but they aren't necessarily to their core loyal like members of this aristocracy. They're just of the 10 million that are being more or less enslaved by them. So a lot of people had a lot of reason to kind of go, hey, if you're going to cut me a better deal, I'll hang with you. And in amongst that, Pizarro does find himself a bit of a translator who's able to get him in with Atahualpa. So what he does is he sends his brother and the translator and a couple of other guys on horseback up to these baths in the hills. And he sits and waits with a friar and a bunch of other people. And they hide out in the plaza. And the goal of the brother and the translator is to invite Atahualpa to a feast that is supposed to celebrate Atahualpa's victory. So he's pandering to his ego, which in fairness is probably the best way to get Atahualpa to do anything. But what they're not understanding is that Atahualpa's not an idiot either. He's an emperor who's been learning from his dad his whole life. So again, this is where the stories kind of differ, because from some accounts, they say that Atahualpa believes these men, and by other accounts, it goes a little bit differently. I'd rather tell you the Incas version of, or the Peruvian version of the story, since they are the descendants of these people, and they have a bit of a different slant on it than just Pizarro Trojan horsed this bitch, which is basically the Spanish version, cut and dry. Like, oh, they thought we were gods, and they Trojan horsed, and it worked, is like their version of this story. Meanwhile, Atahualpa believes he himself is a god, so the likelihood that he thought that Pizarro and his people were gods is pretty low. And he's also not an idiot, he just doesn't speak Spanish. So this is how they tell the story. You've got Pizarro down in the plaza, you've got his brother and his translator, who's, I mean, like kind of a traitor, I guess, but again, probably wasn't even a subject until the other day, so I don't even really blame him. And who knows what intimidation tactics might have been used for this poor guy. So you have Pizarro's brother and the translator and a couple of other dudes, and they go up to where Atahualpa is meditating in his bath, which, by the way, you can actually still see, sort of. So there is a replica where this would have actually taken place at these baths. These baths are really cool. They overlook like the valley, and they're gigantic squares essentially. And I get the sense it was probably pretty much like that back then too, because they were great at masonry. If you look at Machu Picchu, it's a marvel. So it looks pretty much how it would have at the time. It's just like the little building where Atahualpa would have been is a replica of the building that was there before. It, of course, as per the usual when it comes to ruins, was destroyed at one point and then rebuilt. So you still get like the visual of how this place would have looked. So you've got Atahualpa, who has all of his men around him, and these are like big ass warrior men. And they're all chilling, and they're in their happy place, and they're not trying to start shit, but they don't also want to deal with shit. And these guys come up and they say, hey, we would love to invite you to a party in Cajamarca, which again is Atahualpa's city, but like, sure. According to the Spaniards, Atahualpa is overjoyed at this idea and he's like, oh my God, you're right, I'm amazing, let's do this, let's party, I'll see you guys tomorrow. That's their version of this story, which sounds fun and also highly unlikely because it's Atahualpa. The dude is literally, in his culture, a sun god. He is a king who does not need to be celebrated by these weirdos, has nothing to do with them, and is doing his own thing. Like, why are you in my room? Get out of my bath. This is me time. This is my spa day. Get out. So what he more or less does is, according to the Incan version of things, he ignores them. Like, doesn't deign to look at them at all. He just sits there with his eyes to the ground and just goes, as they talk. And they keep trying to talk to him, and he completely ignores them. And they keep trying to talk. And so eventually, one of the guys takes his ring off of his finger, and he goes, listen, I want to give this to you as a token of my friendship to prove that, like, this is nothing but love, man. We're going to be bros. And Atahualpa tells his translator that, like, he doesn't wear the jewelry of peasants and basically to get to step in. Like, that little thing, that's a trinket. Like, what are you doing? To put this in context, Atahualpa, again, while they don't use gold as like a currency, they're showered in it. He has gardens paved in gold where like they have gold cornstalk sculptures of pure solid gold. They know that gold is worth something. They know that it's valuable. They know what's good stuff. They've got the best stuff you can find. He's not caring about this little tiny dumbass ring. Like, to the guy, it was probably everything he could possibly give him, you know, and again, to be a dick, secretly. But like, the guy's thinking this wonderful thing to hand him, but Atahualpa is the head of the Incas, who are the head of a giant dynasty. The Incas themselves, their nobility, were allowed to wear obscene amounts of gold and silver and emeralds and everything that they could mine out of those lands. They had it all. And Atahualpa was allowed to wear way more of it than that. Again, his sandals were made of silver. Like, the soles themselves were silver, which actually couldn't have been very comfortable, but that's what they did. So he has headdresses just gilded and everything. He doesn't need your dumbass ring. He sees it, insults the dude because, you know, he could, frankly. And also, like, he probably sniffed out that this was no good. He had heard of the Spanish by now, because the Spanish had already, at this point, been wandering through his territories while he's busy with his brother, and they are, at this point, stealing from him. And according to the Peruvian version of this, he calls him out. So what he does is he tells him, I'm not taking your dumbass ring. It's pathetic. And also, don't talk to me. And he just sits there and waits them out for like 3 hours. Like, what a flex. He just enjoys himself and ignores their presence. And every now and then they would like shift a little and they'd walk outside and they're getting nervous. Like, he's really waiting them out. Like you would in an interrogation room, you know, like just to fuck with him psychologically. Again, military bro. And so eventually, like 3 hours later, he's like, all right, listen, I'll go to your stupid party. But I'm only going if you and your band of assholes give me back my shit, because you've been stealing from me, you've been stealing from my country, I want my stuff back. That's why I'm going down there. You will either give it to me, or you see all these people, we will flatten you. Go. So pissing their pants, I hope, these guys go. Again, he's way taller than them too. He basically does it like this, like he's like staring down. And which as a short person, intimidating, I understand. So they scamper down the hill and they go and tell Pizarro, and Pizarro's like, all right, whatever, he's coming now. So Atahualpa is not worried. He's seen these little assholes. He's seen how few people there are down there. He knows that he outnumbers these people by thousands. He has thousands of people with him. They have at this point 200 people that they have scrounged together to join them on this mission. I don't really even know where they found this many Spaniards at this point, because like they started with 13, but the math is mathing, and either way, they have 200 some people, including Pizarro and a couple of his brothers and a translator that they probably conned into it or scared into it, and Valverde, who is a friar. Atahualpa chills and enjoys the rest of his spa day. The next day, they start off by drinking a lot. They Sunday fun day this shit. I don't even know if it was a Sunday, but I like to imagine it was. They basically brunch. They break their fast, they eat a whole ton of food, and they drink enormous amounts of alcohol. Now, their alcohol at the time was only like 3%. I'm drinking this right now. I want to say it's 5.4, so this is already stronger than what they had to drink. But I'm having one, and they're having fucking gallons of it. And they're drinking and drinking and drinking and partying and singing, and they're chanting because they're getting ready. They're excited. They're just gonna go down there and get their shit back. They know that they are a huge, ridiculous, giant group of people with like gold litters that they're carrying their nobles on, including Atahualpa, who's this literal fucking giant of a person and the emperor and a god in their culture, an actual god. And they have already conquered Huascar. They can take these assholes. So they take their time. It's a 6-mile trek downhill into Cajamarca from where they are. It shouldn't take long. They left around 11 o'clock in the morning, and they kept stopping, dancing, and fucking around, and drinking, and drinking, and drinking. So they're shit-faced by this time. They are absolutely plastered. They're like having a good old time. It's a party. Like, fuck this. This is the beginning. Yeah, you guys want to feast? Let's go. They began their feast up on the mountain. They don't get there until like 4 or 5 o'clock at night. They started at 11. They take like 6 hours. That's a mile per hour. Now, granted, they've got a lot of shit with them and they're carrying their litters and stuff, but this normally would take like no time at all. It's downhill. They intentionally just disrespectfully take as long as they possibly can to get to this plaza and deal with this guy. So they get down there and no one's there. It's completely dead. They are in the center of the plaza and they're looking around and they don't see anybody except for like one dude, just one of their dudes. Atahualpa's like, hey, we were told there was a party. Where is he? Where is he? And the guy tells him, like, they're in the buildings. And he's nervous. And Atahualpa's like, in the buildings? Why doesn't he come out? If he's so tough, I thought we were having a feast, man. Thought we were friends. So then they push out Valverde, who is like I said, a Catholic friar. And Valvarde's holding a prayer book in his hands. And he tells him, you have to pay homage to Charles V as the rightful ruler of this land. You have to concede, and you have to say that you're a Catholic, and you have to, proclaim that our God is the real God. He's talking to a god as far as these other guys are concerned, like especially Atahualpa. He's been raised his entire life to see himself as the sun god. And Valverde has the balls to be like, hey, or at least he's forced to have the balls, to be like, hey, shaky hand, I'm sure, this is my prayer book. This is the real work of the Lord. Charles V is the Spanish king. This is his land now. We need you to come here, and you have to say that you're a Catholic and that everybody else needs to be a Catholic too, and you need to proclaim Charles V as the rightful ruler of this land. Atahualpa's like, let me see that. And he holds the book in his hands. Now, here's the thing. Again, they don't have a written language. which means they don't have books. There's no need for books. They've operated just fine without them. They have word of mouth. They have, again, numerical systems with the Quipu knots, but they don't have a written language. He doesn't understand what the hell this is. It's a bunch of papery tree bark glued together or sewn together probably. And he's looking at it and it doesn't mean anything to him. He doesn't understand what this weird trinket is in his hands. He doesn't get the importance of it. He doesn't really care that much because, again, he knows he outnumbers all these guys. And he's like, no. What happens next is contested a little bit, whether or not Atahualpa drops the book or if he throws it disrespectfully. I'm inclined to believe either one could be true. Sounds like him to throw it. Also could have just dropped it. I don't think it meant enough to him, but I know that it meant that he knew it meant a lot to Valvardi, and he probably wanted to flex because that was sort of his thing. Regardless of how the book ends up on the ground, the book ends up on the ground. Valvardi, at this point, just probably so scared. Valvardi signals for Pizarro. The thing is, while yes, it's true that Pizarro only had 200-ish men, what they did have was horses, which scared the shit out of the Incas because they didn't have horses. And they had gunpowder. And the Incas had never seen gunpowder. They weren't dressed to be in a battle because they were up relaxing at the baths, not expecting a battle. And even if they did, they had swords. It's literally a knife to a gunfight. And their helmets are wicker, regardless of what they could have ever done. And this is why I truly believe he's unlucky. Because in any other situation in history, in any other part of his culture, he would have flattened them. But because Pizarro had gunpowder, which had never been brought there up until this moment, he gets fucked over. Pizarro has 4 cannons hiding in the plaza that he has been setting up while they were having their bath day and their carousing. And Pizarro has his men charge with the horses, which terrify the Incas because they've never seen a horse before. It's a beast. Imagine never seeing a horse before. It's this giant creature that they're riding, and it makes no sense to them because they've never seen. It's like if we saw a mammoth, only we at least have like context of what a mammoth would be. They don't even have context of what a horse is. And it's charging at them, so they don't know what this beast is. Now there's gunpowder, which they have no idea how to even conceptualize that, let alone have any defenses over it. And within minutes, 5,000 Incas die. It was originally called the Battle of Cajamarca. It has been renamed, I believe rightfully in history, as the Massacre of Cajamarca, because for a battle, you kind of expect that both sides would lose people, but the Spaniards didn't lose a single solitary person. 5,000 Incas died in minutes, in like 10 minutes, because it's a small square, there's nowhere to run, they have nothing to battle it out with, they're completely caught off guard. It's a betrayal, which in Inca culture, even by military standards, betrayal wasn't really utilized as a battle tactic. They did a lot of other things to each other. They captured each other, they assassinated each other, they tortured each other, they did all of that other stuff, but betrayal itself wasn't woven into their culture to that extent. So that was not thought of quite as much as perhaps it would be now. You could say that that's a lack of foresight, but if it's not in your culture, it's not in your culture. You don't have the thought process for it. 5,000 of his men die. And while all of this is going down, Pizarro himself, along with 7 other horsemen, charge at Atahualpa's litter. And the litter is that thing where it's like the king is being hoisted by other guys and he's being carried, so these guys are holding him and they're trying to get away. And Pizarro and his men slice their arms off and they still carried him on their shoulders before falling, still trying to run. Which is so badass. Like, I broke my wrist like 7 months ago, and I still complain. Like, their arms were amputated, and they did this with their shoulders and still tried to run. Like, that is really trying hard to escape. And that is bravery, and it is tough as nails, and it is tragic because it doesn't work. Pizarro himself gets the only wound that the Spanish have is Pizarro cuts himself while capturing Atahualpa. And that's when it ends. The battle ends. The massacre ends. Atahualpa is captured, and Pizarro has taken over, and they need to figure out what to do with him. So Atahualpa starts to get crafty, and he recognizes that the Spanish have been stealing from him, but they're mostly stealing gold and silver, which, again, for him, while definitely a valuable commodity, is not quite the commodity that it is to them. But he recognizes that this seems to be the thing that they care about. They care about gold, they care about silver, and they care about jewels. And he has that all over the place because they have all of these really crazy temples full of gold and silver. And that gold and silver mostly stays in place as each emperor moves forward. Like either they're buried with it or it stays like within the city, again in the gardens and temples and everything else. So he knows that his empire is full of this. He also knows that Huascar had a ton of it himself. And so he gets to thinking, I wonder if I can like ransom myself and barter for my freedom. Because what this guy seems to really want is this. Like he doesn't know how to like handle this big, huge empire. I bet I can like play to what seems to be his greed. And so he does. So Atahualpa is brought to what is now considered the ransom room, and he is imprisoned there. And he tells Pizarro, listen, man, I'm gonna level with you. I know you like all this gold and silver. By the way, fun fact, Atahualpa actually preferred silver to gold. He just liked it better. I think it was more of like a moon goddess sort of a thing, but he was partial actually to silver between the two, but loved them both, of course. So he goes, listen, man, I have a ton of this stuff. We are so wealthy. I know how to get it, and if you let me fill this entire room, this room he's imprisoned in, this like 6 foot tall, big ass room, he's like, if you let me fill this room with all of the treasures that you can ever imagine, how about you let me go? So Pizarro's like this whole room, like the whole thing. Pizarro is a poor ass bitch. Not to be classist, but Pizarro sucks. Pizarro is a poor dude. He wants wealth. He wants what Cortez has. And he's like, you could just fill this whole thing up? You playing? And he's like, no, man, I promise you, I've got this. I have actual, like you've seen my gardens. I know what you've stolen already. You think that's anything? That is nothing compared to what I can give you. Let me fill this room up, and then you can let me go and we're square. Pizarro's like, all right, bet, let's do it. So Atahualpa gets started. Now this is crafty for both men. For one thing, Atahualpa is quickly learning Spanish, and he starts to hang out with the guards that are guarding him. He starts to learn their customs. He starts to get to know them. He starts to befriend them because he's actually a very charismatic guy, and he's a military bro. Like these guys are military bros to a certain extent. They're conquistadors. He's starting to get along with them actually, and a friendship even starts to spur a little bit with him and Pizarro to a certain extent. They actually even teach him to play chess, and he starts to beat them at chess, which in retro, probably not like the best poker move, but he does. He's like playing games with them and stuff. And in the meantime, he is more or less ruling his kingdom from his imprisoned room, like where he's stuck. But he's still allowed to see his nobles. He's still allowed to see his generals. He's still allowed to more or less conduct everything as emperor from the ransom room. And as he does that, true to his word, he gets through that big crazy system of roadways that we talked about, he gets pounds and pounds and pounds of jewels and gold and silver. And it takes about 2 months, but he does actually fill the room so tall that they have to transport him into another room, which is like the Palace of the Snake, or like the Room of the Snake is what it's called. Not as Indiana Jones as you might think. It actually is just a carved snake on the wall. I nearly had a heart attack before I realized that they meant like a carving. It's getting so chock full of what was almost definitely Huascar's silver and gold first, and then probably also the stuff that Atahualpa had. Atahualpa's gold is up in the mountains. It's in Quito. They're grabbing all of this from Cusco, which is why I know it's Huascar shit. And also, like, you know, the ancestral stuff. Huascar, in the meantime, is still imprisoned, by the way. He's not dead yet. Until eventually Atahualpa's feeling a little squirrely, and he's like, you know what, buddies? Let's get rid of him. I could use a pick-me-up today. I'm feeling a little despondent. Because as he's filling this room, he's starting to get worried. And he starts to get a little depressed. And the generals even talk about the fact that he's a little depressed. So he orders Huascar to be murdered and beheaded. And what he then does is has his head brought to him, and he starts to drink out of his brother's skull. Like, I mean, I know it was a different culture at another time, but out of his head. I'm sure they talked at some point, and now you're drinking out of his head. It's an image. So anyway, Pizarro comes in and he realizes that Atahualpa, who's been a little bit depressed lately, seems a little bit too happy for what's going on. And he's like, what's going on, man? And he goes, I have the best trophy I've ever had in my life. This is the victorious day for me, actually. And he goes, what? What do you mean? You're in here. What is going on? What are you doing? And he goes, this is my brother's head. This is my trophy. I'm going to drink out of this forever. And he does. He continues to drink out of it. Like he's like drinking booze out of his brother's head. This sufficiently freaks Pizarro out. While all of this is happening, Pizarro's starting to realize he doesn't really have a plan of what to do with the Inca once he gets his ransom, which is, by the way, one of the craziest ransoms in history. It amounts eventually to 13,000 pounds of gold and 26,000 pounds of silver, plus all of the jewels that you can imagine. Roughly translated, like with inflation and all of that, it's at least $50 million in today's money of ransom. Back then. Like, insane. For a dude who had nothing, was illiterate. Speaking of illiterate, at one point, there is a story where Atahualpa, I feel one of the reasons why Atahualpa, while yes, absolutely unlucky and absolutely screwed over by the times, and therefore definitely sufficient for this show, Atahualpa is also like a bit of an egomaniac, as many of these guys were back then. I guess that's what happens when you're raised to believe that you're literally a sun god. So Atahualpa starts to like catch on to things, and he likes to flex a little bit. So what he does is he realizes that Pizarro is dictating letters to King Charles and to other people. He's dictating letters to other people. He's not writing them down. And so Atahualpa's like, what is this? What is this? What is going on here? Why is he never writing stuff? He never has like a pen in his hand, like a quill. What is he doing? While he doesn't have a written language himself, he's smart enough to know all of the things he needs to know in his culture to run a fucking empire. Or at least he knows how to delegate, but he's considered a wise man. And even the Spaniards guarding him consider him wise. Again, he's learning Spanish. He learned to play chess. Like, the dude's smart. He's not just a jock. This is an intelligent person. He probably would have made maybe a ruthless emperor, maybe not, but certainly a great emperor given the chance. He was raised for this shit. So he's watching and he's like, that can't be what I think it is. So he calls one of his jailers over and he's like, hey, what's your word for God? And the guy goes, Dios. And he goes, okay, Dios? And he goes, yeah. He goes, can you write that on my thumbnail? And so in a tiny little script, he writes Dios on the guy's thumbnail. So then he goes, hey, you, other jailer, can you write God on my thumbnail? And he does it over and over and over again. And he has a couple of times in different handwriting, Dios. Pizarro comes in the room, having himself a good old day, comes in the room and he's like, what's going on here? And Atahualpa's like, hey man, what does this say? And Pizarro can't read it. Because for all of Pizarro's, frankly, tactical brilliance at times, he never bothered to learn. And he can't, and he's humiliated in front of his men. Not a good move, probably, but certainly made Atahualpa laugh. So Pizarro's now humiliated. And now he's also freaked out because Atahualpa, in the meantime, is like leaning back, drinking out of his brother's fucking head. And he's like, I don't know what's going on here, but I don't like it. And also, like, the room's almost full, so I got to think of something. There were rumors, and I don't really have any idea where these rumors started. Doesn't actually matter because they kind of just started the way rumors do. Somebody hears something and it keeps going. That there was a general that was gathering a bunch of men to break Atahualpa out. The validity of that claim is unknown, but the rumors were there. Pizarro himself didn't write about it, but had people write about it. And he's nervous now. And he's like, I can't, he's already broken out of jail. That's how he fucking beat his brother. He's capable of it. He's still commanding people. Now, it was smart of Pizarro at the time to let Atahualpa command his people. And he did it intentionally. It wasn't just a bad move on his part or laziness. He was watching Atahualpa and learning from him. Never fucking learned to read, but he was learning how the country kind of worked and the ins and outs and things about it. Like, he's catching on. He was watching him the entire time. So he's basically learning and making himself an apprentice of his prisoner while his prisoner fucking pays him for it, essentially. That's a sick move, really, for, a conquering asshole. So he's learning about things, and now he's worried that there might be an uprising to crack Atahualpa out and to basically overthrow Pizarro. So Pizarro, on May 3rd, has all of the gold and silver melted down, and it's distributed amongst his men. About 20% of that is sent allegedly up to the King of Spain, Charles V. Here's the thing, though. Huascar's people, like loyalists that are pissed that Huascar's been assassinated, are in the meantime also filling rooms with gold and silver for Pizarro. And the only rooms that are being filled that are accounted for in records are from Atahualpa, because the 20% has to be tithed to the Spanish king. No one has any idea where that other gold or silver went. It's not accounted for. It just goes fucking missing. Along with a lot of the gold from their dad, Hayana Capac, as well. There was apparently a very long gold chain that required multiple men to carry it, and no one knows where this gold chain went. It just disappeared in history. It's rumored now, but apparently it existed, and we don't know where it is. It's actually part of what is a huge treasure hunt, even to this day. So Huascar's treasure is somewhere else, and it's more or less being collected to convince Pizarro to assassinate Atahualpa. Atahualpa's creating a ransom so that he can buy his freedom, but now Pizarro doesn't know what to do because he really doesn't want Atahualpa in the way, and now he's worried that Atahualpa's going to turn on him, which, they're not really buddies. Of course he would. So Pizarro melts down the gold, distributes it out, and then gets rid of one of the main generals of Atahualpa's. He sends him to Cusco with some of his men, and basically all of Atahualpa's people kind of tried to play nice with Pizarro, hoping that they would get Atahualpa back. And while he's gone, and while De Soto, who's one of the Spaniards that befriended Atahualpa, is gone with him on a false mission that didn't even really exist, just gets him out of the way, Pizarro creates a trial, and in this bullshit trial, tries Atahualpa as a usurper to his own crown because he's not the eldest son of Hayana Capac, his brother Huascar was. And so he tries him for treason against his own people, which again, that's not how Incan monarchies worked. It is according to Spanish traditions, and it's also complete bullshit. It is really just an excuse to give a trial, quote unquote. Atahualpa is found guilty. He is then sentenced to burn at the stake. So he fills this room with gold, silver, and jewels as promised, and Pizarro sentences him to death anyway. Now here's the thing. According to Incan lore, Atahualpa has two options in the afterlife. One option is to transcend and go into the afterlife, heaven, if you will. And the other is to be reincarnated, come back, and rule his people again. Both are options. Only if you are not burned. If you are burned alive, you can't come back. So Atahualpa, who allegedly wept at the notion that he would be killed, begs and pleads to not be burned alive. In comes Valverde with all of the spiritual and religious grace of a priest. And Valverde says, all right, you have to be baptized as a Catholic. And if you're baptized as a Catholic, we will show you mercy and we will only strangle you to death. Atahualpa agrees, and he is garroted until he dies. Supposedly, by some accounts, Pizarro also wept, but I don't know if that's true or not. I kind of like to hope it is. I like to hope that he wasn't a complete sociopath, but he showed in no other section of his life any regard for native people, their cultures, the pain he was inflicting, the chaos he was sowing. He didn't seem to care. This is a poor kid from the wrong side of the tracks that found himself in the right place at the right time with the right equipment, and frankly kind of lucked out, managed to capture a literal God on earth to his people, beat out thousands of men within minutes, and then sentenced him to die in a sham trial that he constructed once he got De Soto, who would have not stood for it, out of the way. But maybe he did. Maybe he felt bad. I fucking hope he felt bad for the rest of his life. Not that Atahualpa was like the best dude. I mean, you know, he was a murderer too, obviously, and he drank out of his brother's head, but he wasn't betraying anybody. And, you know, you could do a lot of terrible things to a person, and I'm not gonna say betrayal is worse than death. I'm never gonna say that, that's silly, but it's one of the worst things you can do to a human being. If you think of any of the times in your life that you have felt the most wronged and the most lost, it's been because you're betrayed by somebody that you believed. And I don't know if Atahualpa fully believed him, but I think he must have had some hope. And Pizarro could have made good. I don't know what that would have looked like, but we'll never know, because instead, he listened to rumors, which, in fairness, I could see the fear there. And he made a call. Atahualpa was in his early 30s, and he was murdered after being baptized. There are two names that I've been given. My research has shown that he was baptized as Francisco, because supposedly, by some accounts, Pizarro was his godfather, which, of course. But when I talked to Ana Maria, who is the friend of mine from Peru, and her brother, Carlos, I talked to them actually just this weekend, and I discussed with them what they learned. And some of my research comes from them because they were taught this story in schools. They are partially Incan and partially Spanish in their heritage, and they were taught, you know, not the Western story. They were taught the Peruvian version, and that's not the story of the victor all the time. It is a blending of the two because both cultures formed what is now Peru, and they do pay homage to both. And neither of them feels that it went down the proper way. But they said that his Catholic name was Juan. I don't know which one's true. Again, conflicting stories, but according to Peruvian lore, it is Juan. According to the Spaniards, it is Francisco. I can certainly understand why they would differ in their storyline. Not that it really matters, because at the end of that day, Atahualpa was suffocated and strangled until he died, until he literally, his brain stopped working. He was 32. Then they left him in the square overnight. They left his body just out. After that, What happens is a bit of a confusing mystery, and it has sparked one of the greatest mysteries in all of South America, and it is an absolutely incredible, sort of tempting thing for historians and archaeologists, and that is, where is his body and where is his gold? Because we don't know the answer to that. Initially, Pizarro and his band of asshole men, and of course Valverde, give Atahualpa a Catholic burial underneath a church that they had transformed into a Catholic church. They entomb him, they give him a Catholic burial, and then they go off to Cusco and a variety of other places where they proceed to place a puppet Incan in power to sort of work for them. These took the form of first a brother of Atahualpa's who was then poisoned, allegedly, because he dies on the way, and then one of his cousins. Eventually, he tries to turn on them, and basically what happens afterwards is the Spanish have a tenuous hold on Peru and the rest of the Inca Empire, but it's never really stable. Pizarro also goes on to establish Lima as the capital city, where it is at this time the capital, and he becomes sort of, the head honcho, essentially. And that is the establishment of Lima in Peru, which is a fun city, and I encourage you to go. The reason we don't know where Atahualpa is, however, is that apparently he's not under that church right now. Allegedly, his followers dug him out and buried him off in the mountains with the treasure that was rightfully his, or at least some of it. There's also a rumor that he escaped and was replaced by a commoner before he died, although I kind of doubt that there would have even been an option for that. But supposedly he was out in the hills, and rumor has it, legend has it, he still is. Another story said that he was actually beheaded when he was strangled. I only read a couple of versions of that one, but apparently it would still be okay because according to Incan lore, the head would then grow another body, which is very Deadpool, but he would grow another body and then again, rule again. There are all of these very hopeful legends that take place that basically give the people hope that they will get their culture and their kingdom back in the form of Atahualpa, their god. Hasn't happened yet, but that's their story. As for Pizarro, he definitely gets rich off of all of this. He pulls a Cortez, he was successful, but Charles V was pissed. And he actually reprimands Pizarro brutally. Because for Charles V, Pizarro acted in a lot of ways on his own sort of whims. Like Charles wasn't pissed about the money, obviously. He liked the money. He liked that he was, spreading his lands farther and all of that, because they all did. And he's not necessarily mad that now they have control over this empire. He's kind of frustrated that they don't know how to manage this empire and that these puppet Incas are not really falling in line the way he would like them to, obviously. But he's more angry on principle with Pizarro because he was like, that's a sovereign ruler of a nation, and what you did was shitty. That's poor form. That's not how you treat a foreign king in his country. And Pizarro never really regained the favor of Charles V, if he ever had it to begin with. While yes, the money was great, and he of course accepted it happily, he was pissed at him and never respected him. Whether that mattered to Pizarro, I guess depends on Pizarro. I don't know what mattered to Pizarro other than money and glory, and he got versions of both. He never really keeps a really balanced hold in his country, his new country, but he does establish Lima, and he does go down in history as one of the most ruthless assholes ever to exist. He is not thought of kindly, and I believe Charles actually considered Atahualpa a bit of a martyr, which is kind of big of him if you think about it, since he didn't order the execution. He viewed him that way. There was a bit of respect there. And I think that there's something to be said for that, because while you're always going to have psychos like Pizarro, and while Charles V was by no stretch of the imagination a good guy in any of this, I think that there is a human need to feel respect and connection for someone in a situation where you kind of fucked them over. And that's an interesting twist to that story. The Spanish influence in Peru and Bolivia and Ecuador and Chile and of course Colombia is still evident today. Things have obviously simmered down a bit. The Incas more or less never came back from what happened. With Atahualpa went the entire Inca Empire. And it was all over an alleged feast in a square after a spa day, because the world that was coming into his was unlike anything he would have ever been prepared for. Someone born into royalty is just born into royalty. And they're trained to be a part of it. They're trained to believe certain things about themselves. And yes, they are without a doubt privileged. They have that silver spoon, but sometimes that silver spoon is the thing that takes them down, whether they did anything to deserve it or not. Atahualpa was a ruthless warrior. He was trained that way from birth. He was supposed to be. I don't think he ever would have had the option to not be, and I don't think for the purposes of the world that he was in that it was a bad thing. I mean, ethically, sure, you're not supposed to, killing people is never good, but for the role he was intended to play, I think he played it well. And in any other world, or in any other time, throughout the world that he was raised in, and that his father was raised in, and his brothers and his ancestors, all the way to Manco Capac, and before that to pre-Incan times, he would have likely kept hold of that throne. He would have likely proceeded to push forward into the rest of Colombia, and for good or for bad, they would have continued to conquer and acquire. And I don't know what the history of that would look like. I don't know what the landscape of South America would be if they had continued. What I do know is that it was all lost in a day. And it was lost in a day through no fault of his own. There wasn't much he could have done. And that's kind of what this show is about. Are they always innocent people? No, I wouldn't say that. I think very few people are innocent. And we will get into some situations in later episodes where we discuss maybe like children that are royal that unfortunately are caught up in things, and those are going to be harder episodes, and we'll tackle them with as much grace as we can. But a lot of the time, even the adults didn't have a choice. That's why I think he counts. That's why I think he's one of the least lucky people in his version of royal history. And I hope you enjoyed the episode. If you did, like and subscribe, and we'll see you next time.